Right, now South Africa's national minimum wage will increase to 30 Rand and 23 cents per hour from the 1st of March. It offers a slight bit of relief to millions of low-paid workers, but renewing pressure on employers to comply with the law. The revised wage applies across all sectors, including farm and domestic workers, whose minimum hourly rates remain fully aligned with the national wage floor. For more, we're joined by Thembinkosi Mkalipi, the Acting Deputy Director General for Labour Policy and Industrial Relations at the Department of Employment and Labour. But Mkalipi, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it here as well. The interesting thing to this is that, yes, it's above 30 Rand for the first time. It's a 5% increase. One would say it's slightly above inflation as it had been on average last year. But how was the figure determined? And do you believe it's sufficient, perhaps, to protect workers amid the rising cost of living?
Well, again, I mean, the figure is determined by looking at the rate of inflation, because the law requires that the Commission must make sure that the buying power of the minimum wage is not eroded by inflation. And determined on those bases, and looking at the previous increases that the Commission has given over the years, and looking at the effect of those minimum wages on employment, or the negative, if any. And those are the issues that we look at. We know that there are those who believe that the minimum wage at the rate that is set is still too low for vulnerable people to go out of poverty. But the issue that you need to consider, if you set a very high minimum wage, that will be negative to employment. There's nothing like vulnerability like a person who's unemployed. Therefore, you don't want the national minimum wage to be the cause of unemployment. And that's a balancing act that the Commission needed to make.
And that's why I'm asking then, is this the balancing act? Is this the middle ground you feel at a rate of 30 Rand and 23 cents that would keep employers wanting to continue to employ, but also keeping employees willing to keep on working at that minimum floor?
That's what we are saying exactly. We're saying the increase that we've given, keep that balance of the employers for them to be able to do business. And it takes about more than 6 million workers out of poverty. I mean, before the minimum wage, there were about 6 million workers who are earning far below what the minimum wage was. Therefore, the steps that we're taking does meet the needs of both sides of this proposal.
All right, let's talk about enforcement of this, because, for example, COSATU has welcomed this increase. We had them on one of our previous shows as well. But they've still argued that there are workers in the expanded public works program that remain excluded from this full wage. Are you able to, as the Department of Employment and Labour, to enforce through other departments that government itself should actually be ensuring that they adhere to this minimum wage?
Can we just correct what COSATU was saying? In South Africa, we don't have one minimum wage. We've got the minimum wage that we're talking about. We've got the EPWP minimum wage. This is around about 16 Rand 62 cents, which is far lower than the minimum wage of all other workers. And then you've got the minimum wage for workers who are on skills learnerships. We've got those three sets of minimum wages. Now, the issue of EPWP is not an enforcement issue. It's an issue that parties in the labor market, including business labor, took a decision 6 years ago to have a different minimum wage for EPWP, precisely because with the Fiscus as it is, if you increase the minimum wage in PWP, you equalize it. I mean, this minimum wage, it was like the farms and domestic worker, we equalize those. If we equalize the EPWP, we're confident that employment in that sector will be reduced by more than 50%, and that's not what we want to do. Therefore, the issue of enforcement is a different issue.
Has that come from the employers themselves? Are they the ones saying that if it was to increase, which is nearly double from the rate that you've just quoted, if it was to increase to that amount, that they would not be willing to employ anybody anymore? Surely that just means that they're willing to continue the cycle of poverty as well.
It's not like continuing this cycle of poverty. Remember, there's no person that is in poverty more than the person who's unemployed. When you set up a rate, you set up a rate in order to make sure that business is able to carry business. And also that rate meets that balancing act that we're talking about. It's got to protect workers from unemployment also. And the issue of EPWP is a decision that was taken 6 years ago by both labor, business, and government. And EPWP is not employers, private employers. It is subsidized, it's work creation, work opportunities that is paid directly from the Fiscus. Now, you know and we know the struggle that the Fiscus had over these years. Now, the Fiscus, we know that National Treasury always talk about the 250 grant that the government is paying that they believe is unaffordable. Now, if we are going to be increasing the Fiscus, we need the buy-in of all the stakeholders. Therefore, EPWP is not money paid by the private sector, it's money paid by through the Fiscus to keep people in employment opportunities. And we say if we increase that to the minimum wage, we definitely confident that we will lose more than 50% of the people that are employed on those projects.
Yeah, I take on what you're saying, and I understand where you're coming from with regards to the strain on the Fiscus. My worry here is that if, as government, it doesn't have the same figure as the national minimum wage and has a different figure for the EPWP, it then just looks off. It looks as though government is getting an easier ride when it comes to paying workers as opposed to all others who should be paying people double. But we're hoping that maybe that will be a conversation for some other time. At the same time, though, with all of that at play, I think the minister has also said that they're committed to hiring 20,000 additional labor inspectors. Let's just talk about how will this expansion change the department's ability, especially to crack down on any defaulting employers.
There's no doubt that there is a challenge about enforcement of the national minimum wage and compliance, not really enforcement, compliance. The research that we do every year before we review the national minimum wage indicate to us that the compliance is at 60%. Therefore, there's about 40% of employers who are not complying with the national minimum wage. And that's why the minister has taken the decision to increase the number of inspectors. Remember, to enforce the national minimum wage, it must be enforced. Domestic sector, for example, the houses in South Africa, we've got more than 1 million domestic workers. Therefore, we've got more than 1 million domestic employers. To enforce in that sector, you need big capacity. And these inspectors, 20,000 that the minister has indicated that will be recruited into the system, are going to assist in dealing with this 40% deficit of compliance with the minimum wage.
But Mkalipi, are you able to just detail the consequences or penalties that employers face for not adhering to or complying with this national minimum wage and the requisite regulation that has been put in place?
Well, I mean, the law is clear in that if an employer has not complied with the minimum wage, the inspectors need to calculate how much is it that the employer has not paid. After calculating that, double that non-payment, double that. Let us say the employer has not paid 100 rand of minimum wage over the last 6 months, and they double that to 200 rand as a penalty of the employer for not complying with the minimum wage. And all of that money is supposed to go to the employee that has not been paid the minimum wage, because it's them who have lost opportunity cost. The penalties are not for the Fiscus, are for the employee that has not get the minimum wage. And that's how the enforcement of the minimum wage is structured in terms of the law.
Yeah, I mean, are you able to share what the long-term vision for the wage floor actually is then on this? I mean, how do you balance worker protection with business sustainability, as you've been trying to make a note of as well in this interview?
It's not an easy balancing act that we need to make. There's a discussion now in the commission that talk precisely on that. There's no decision that has been made in terms of where should we peg our minimum wage. Where should it be in the mid? Should it be an average of the lowest paid workers in the country? Where should it be pegged so that we are able to say we've dealt with this issue. But that decision has not been finalized. It's discussions that are taking place in the Commission.
Yeah, and one wonders then, is the intended goal here just to reduce poverty, to sustain jobs, boost growth, etc.? How do you measure whether it's actually working? How do you know whether this national minimum wage has given out the kind of assistance to the economy as perhaps has been needed and is continuing to be needed, because we still have millions of South Africans still living in poverty?
Well, I mean, you can't look at the minimum wage only to deal with issues of poverty. Minimum wage is one tool. The other tool that is necessary to deal with these issues is for the economy to create enough jobs for people to be able to work. And that process is a government-wide process. The minimum wage is one tool. And when we look at the minimum wage, as I've indicated, there's a research that we do on an annual basis, not done by the department, it's done by independent institution. We've got a contract with the University of Cape Town, UCT, that the institute there in UCT that does the research for us and indicate what effect the minimum wage is having on jobs and on livelihood of the people affected by this national minimum wage. And they do that on an annual basis and give a report before this decision. If you look at our report, it covers all of those issues.
Thembinkosi Mkalipi, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it here as we've been able to dissect as much as possible, I suppose, when it comes to the increase in the national minimum wage. So around 5% increase to 30.23 rand per hour. That is Thembinkosi Mkalipi, the Acting Deputy Director General for the Labour and Industrial Relations at the Department of Employment.